Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Now, over the last 24 hours, the Russian Federation has launched the largest drone strike of the war thus far. At least over 800 to 900 combat drones, kamikaze drones for the most part, were utilized in strikes all across the Ukraine. Now, additionally, Kiev itself had come under fairly significant bombardment of these drones and missile systems. Now, we have seen the cabinet of ministers. That target was hit within the last 24 hours, apparently by a single drone. Now, the question: if Russia had wanted to destroy the cabinet of ministers, could it have done so? And the answer to that is absolutely. So the question is, what was the purpose of that single drone strike that did fairly minor damage to the cabinet of ministers? Was it a notice for something that is to come, that is larger, that is more capable, that could essentially destroy that building? Possibly. Now, for a strike, an operation by the Russians that used more than 800 drone systems, not to mention missile systems, only approximately 2 civilians were killed. What does that tell us? Well, that tells us that the Russians are not targeting civilians. They are not targeting civilians. The Russians were targeting the civilian infrastructure of Kiev, meaning to launch a terror bombing campaign, the likes of which we saw during World War II, upon the Germans attacking England, and the United States and England attacking the Germans and the Japanese. That is not yet happening. So what are the targets that the Russians are going after? By and large, they appear to be military targets. Now, the Ukrainians are reporting that they're shooting down quite a few of these drones. I think in the last instance, the Ukrainians reported shooting over 700 of these drones down. And that's a pretty big number. Now, you also have to consider that the Ukrainians are being directly supported by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There are systems in place right now in western Ukraine, in Kiev and the outskirts of Kiev, that are being used, that are being tested in this conflict. There are systems that the Ukrainians possess that the United States and NATO have handed over to the Ukrainians, quite possibly the actual NATO personnel on the ground, helping the Ukrainians utilize these weapon systems. And then again, as I talked about before, the intelligence apparatus, the ability to understand where a lot of these attacks are coming from and then engage those missile systems. That aspect of the conflict is incredibly robust in terms of intel sharing, real-time intel sharing. Now, what is happening in the front line near Pokrovsk? Well, we know right now there is a very large buildup of Russian forces that are occurring right now, in which may mean that the Russians are looking at a final offensive on Pokrovsk. The Russians have not yet launched that large-scale offensive that would complete the encirclement of the city. Again, the Russians are continuing to utilize this fix-and-hold strategy to engage and destroy and degrade Ukrainian forces in this sector. that strategy just is not in the Prokhorovsk sector. It is along the entire line of contact. Again, it is the wearing down of the Ukrainian military where it will eventually collapse. Look, we remember, if we look back at the early stages of the conflict, where Russia was firing off 100 drones a day. Then it was 200, then 300, then 500, and now we're up to almost 1,000. And that's just the start. We will probably see at some point where, if this conflict continues, the Russians will have the capacity to fire 2,000 drones a day. This manufacturing, this industrial process is continuing to enlarge in scope and scale, and it's not going to stop. It is going to continue to expand and get larger and larger. And the question is, will the West, the United States and Western European allies, continue to provide this monetary aid in the form of weapon systems and money to the Ukrainians? But again, make no mistake of this. The Russians are simply not going to stop. They're not going to stop. The tempo of the war is going to continue. The use of drones and missile systems is going to continue to expand and get larger. And the Russians have a war goal and war aim. And in all probability, they will achieve that war goal and war aim. And again, we have to look at the history of the Ukraine. We have to look at the history of Russia in terms of how vital the Ukraine is to the Russian Federation. And that's where I'm going to end it at for today. More videos to come very, very soon. It's been a while since I posted, and I wanted to get something out there. So again, thank you for joining us. More to come very soon. Good day.